Serious, what stories about WW2 did your grandparents tell you, and or what did you find out about their lives during that period? My grandpa had a similar accident. Was sent to Berlin. Happened to be working on the roof, and someone forgot he was up there, and moved the ladder. He slipped, snapped a tendon, and wound up being trained as a medical assistant. Unfortunately, this meant he saw a lot of bad stuff, including having to treat a good friend who then died. He suffered from PTSD and depression the rest of his life, but was a wonderful grandpa. He had trouble talking about the war, so rarely did. While he was in Berlin, he fell in love with a German girl and asked her father for permission to marry her. He was told no, because not only was he American, but he was Italian, which was even worse to the father. After the war, he stayed in Germany for 2 years to help clean up. He said the people were nice. He never had anything bad to say about them. But that's kind of how he was. I think maybe that came from growing up around criminals and understanding people can be both good and bad. His family was in the Mafia and ran a front in Brooklyn, and prior to that, a brothel. He went to Pratt when it was still affordable, so he could become an engineer. He went on to become an aerospace engineer and was a talented woodworker. His grandpa was a woodworker who sold his furniture on the side. He married my grandma, taking in her 2 kids. They bought a house using the GI Bill. Then they had my mom. They were together for 46 years. He survived cancer 3 times. He lived to be 86. It's been 8 years since he passed, and we all still really miss him. His favorite cartoon to watch with me was Hey Arnold, because it reminded him of Brooklyn, and he used to tell me about the homing pigeons he trained on his roof, just like Pigeon Man. My grandpa very rarely talked about it, but he was in the Pacific in WW2. He caught malaria and was sent to a hospital ship to recover, and the Japanese sunk the ship. So he floated for like 10 hours clinging to the wreckage with active malaria before finally being rescued. And after all that, he re-enlisted and fought in the Korean War also. One grandfather was in the AF, fighting in the jungles of Papua New Guinea on the infamous Kokoda track. He had nightmares about his experiences for the duration of his life and only spoke about it to me briefly when I was a kid. He mentioned that he would often cut his own path through the thick jungle because the Japanese would hide up in the trees and ambush them. He wasn't a fan of the bully beef and was constantly soaked through due to torrential rain and mud. He never smoked, but would win cigarettes off his mates in card games, then light them and hang them from the entrance to his tent to help keep the swarms of mosquitoes away. He also coldly told me that the Japanese killed all his friends. He helped build some of the jungle runways for the American planes to later land. He said that once the Americans came, things began to improve. My other grandfather was in the Royal Navy, in the Arctic convoys, delivering much needed supplies to the Russians in Murmansk. Winston Churchill described the convoys as the worst journey in the world. My grandfather initially put his life jacket on as trained to do, when one of the older sailors laughed and told him, "Don't worry about it, son, you'll freeze to death in under a minute anyway." They'd often have to chip away the thick ice on ships to prevent them capsizing. His ship was involved in numerous battles against larger, heavier armed German ships, as well as U-boats and planes. He told me how his ship had to use its last remaining torpedo to scuttle fellow crippled Royal Navy ship, HMS Edinburgh, which was carrying heaps of gold bullion from Stalin, to prevent it slipping into enemy hands. The gold was salvaged in the 1980s. My great-grandfather served in the Leningrad militia during its siege. Leningrad is now known as St. Petersburg. The Nazis severed off the city's supply lines and bombed their food storages. The blockade lasted 900 days, and the citizens basically just farmed wherever they could, while the militia combined with the Red Army held off the Nazis. The daily ration was a small piece of bread. Many people died from starvation. Everyone had a meal ticket, which you needed to receive your ration. People would steal these, and if you lost your ticket, you would lose your rations for the rest of the month. Many people died from starvation, and there were rumors of cannibalism. My great-grandpa was a scout/messenger, and he nearly died to either a bomb or a mine. After that, he received a medical discharge, but remained in the city of Leningrad. When the blockade finally ended, he weighed 39 kilograms. Scary stuff. In high school my history teacher told us a story about his grandparents and their time during the siege of Leningrad. He said that his grandparents scraped the glue off the back of the wallpaper and made it into a oatmeal type of food. The story that sticks with me is the one about the fresh meat. His grandpa came home one day and his wife had 2 fresh fillets. This was obviously suspicious, so he asked where she got this. She said a man knocked on the door selling meats, so she traded her engagement ring for it. He took a bite of the meat to confirm his suspicions, and when he tasted that it was sweet he knew. Apparently human meat is sweet and there were rumors of some point people who were slicing the buttock off corpses and selling the meat to unsuspecting customers. He tracked the guy down and got the ring back. My GF's grandfather served in Stalingrad. It left deep mental scars. He had insomnia and difficulty sleeping every night. They built a quiet room with no sound as sometimes he would wake up to people walking and start screaming. He had a 1,000:1 chance of making it out and was deep in the shit. One night in the 80s apparently he went nuts and thought they were under attack when a car accidentally crashed outside their house. He ran outside and started screaming. The fighting in Stalingrad was among the worst in the war. People were eating the dead, didn't have weapons, and would often fight hand to hand. Were losing fingers due to the cold. They would strip the dead for their clothes as it was insanely cold in the winter. When he was awake he was the nicest guy apparently. Loved fishing. Loved his grandchildren. Just couldn't escape Stalingrad. My grandfather was a kid during WW2. He was born in 1931. He lived in Rugenwald, which used to be part of Germany. Today it's Poland, near the city of Szczecin. His dad had to fight for the Nazis, even though they were not particularly fond of their ideas. My grandfather had to go to Hitler Youth, where they would make all sorts of week-long trips through forests, learn how to handle guns, etc. He wasn't able to visit school for some time due to Germany losing the war. My great-grandfather obviously fought the Russians on the Eastern Front, but he was captured on a mission in Russia and kept as a war prisoner. When he had a really bad lung infection, and it was becoming clearer that Germany will be losing this war, he was released from prison and was able to spend 3 more days with his family before he passed. Then it was my grandfather's turn to try and earn some money as he was the only son they had and his mum had to take care of his youngest sister. When Russia took over the whole area they gave the Germans in the area the chance to leave for Western Germany. They provided one train and said whoever could get on there was free to go, the rest would stay there. My grandfather made sure that his family got on the train, but he didn't have any space himself, so he rode the train by standing on a metal bar thing that connects 2 train wagons for part of the journey. Luckily the train didn't run too fast. Once Hitler came to my grandfather's hometown earlier in the wartime, and he said everyone was so excited to see this man. People literally camped by the train tracks to await his train. Apparently he came by train for some reason. There's plenty more. Since my granddad basically had to flee his hometown and had never returned, he asked me and my dad, his son, to take him there a couple years back, since he would love to see how it's turned out. He was already over 80 years old. Of course we were happy to go, and we spent 9 days there. Some of it was quite emotional for him, and he told me many stories of his childhood. It was really interesting to hear his point of view as he was a child for the most part. Something sweet. My grandparents saved all their love letters sent back and forth during that time. They had just met and had fallen in love before his departure, so they carried on their romance and developed the relationship through beautifully written letters. Those letters expressed every emotion, from the realities and horrors of war to the abiding hope they'd be reunited safe and sound. They were married not long after grandfather's return. My grandmother was a Jew in a Nazi concentration camp. She was pretty much certain to die because she didn't have a job and she wasn't cunning enough to survive on her own. It was rough. One day some local farmers in Russia bought her to work for them during the day. So she would go to the farm to work during the day and come back at night. The farmers would feed her and clothe her. They also helped her sneak food into the camp. Often, I don't know how, she would sneak soups into the camp to give to her friends and family. The farmers were endless in their kindness and helped her survive until the Nazis were defeated and everyone was released. My grandmother was reunited with her family and lived a long life until she died last year. Without the farmer's kindness, I don't think I would be here today.